scene in a movie, so that there's that variety, which we have in life. And we spend a lot of time alone in our own heads, but we're with other people. The dialogue is very quick. I mean, we don't have to think ahead of time what we're going to say 30 minutes after we've met a friend. We just start talking. It's very spontaneous. And the characters are like that too. They just start, it's like lighting a match. It goes very quickly.
Ben Bradley, you're up. Ben, Anne-Marie, and Michael Werner. Ben, you're up. You're on mute, Ben.
Okay, I got it. The book sounds so interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it. You said in the beginning in your introduction that you started it in 2017, and it's largely about contemporary America. Can you discuss the extent to which Donald Trump informed the book?
No, he wasn't. No, I probably wrote it before then because Trump wasn't president at this time.
Oh.
The president who's mentioned in the novel is Obama. The people in the novel voted for Obama, but that's very much in the background. It's not. It's about police brutality and it's about human interaction with public figures, but it's not really a political novel. I don't think I would write about Trump. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure whether that's that's a subject that one can take on. But anyway, I wrote it before then. Yeah.
Okay.
Anne-Marie, you're up.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of your novels since I was a teenager. And one of the things that really struck me when I started reading you was these interior looks at adolescent girls, which were very honest and not cosmetically altered. They were very fresh. And it was something that I didn't really find in a lot of novels at that time in the 70s. And I wonder if you had a sense of this being something unique or you had an inspiration for that.
Well, no, I guess I just identify with 14-year-old girls, and there's a part of me that never really got beyond that age. I can remember when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, I sort of remember my life at that time, and I kind of identify with that. Just that I remember walking in the city, going to school, going to my school building and being alone on a bus. The memories are very vivid, and some of the experiences I wrote about, of course, were my own experiences. But I also come from a background that was actually quite, it was sort of rimmed around with violence. My own family was not, it was not a violent family, but maybe my grandparents lived through some violent incidents. But I was sort of writing about people whom I knew and had gone to school with, some of these girls. I felt very sympathetic with them. Like virtually none of them went on even beyond high school, and none of them went to college. It's just a different world. We tend to feel that everybody is a bit like ourselves, who's been educated and went to college, but so many people never get that far. Something terrible happens to them, or to their families, and they can't really transcend the limitations of their backgrounds.
Michael Werner, you're up.
Yes, this gets to the question that came up a few minutes ago about reading versus reading out loud versus reading to oneself. Many people these days, including me, do a lot of our reading with audiobooks. And I'm wondering whether, in your opinion, your books are better enjoyed as audiobooks or read in the traditional way, and whether you have a opinion, pro or con, about the value of audiobooks.
That's such a good question. Well, I love audiobooks, and I've heard some wonderful, wonderful audiobooks. I think I almost never heard one I didn't like. But for some reason, I never listened to my own books on audio until just recently, maybe since the pandemic. So now when I go out in my car, which is actually not that often, but I'm listening to a novel that I wrote like 20 years ago, and I don't always remember what's coming next, and I'm kind of listening to this reader. In this case, it's a woman reader, and she does different voices. And I'm sort of enthralled because I don't remember what the next person's going to say. So I'm driving along. I think, wow, what happens next? And then I'm almost reluctant to turn off the ignition. I sit in the parking lot waiting for the end of a chapter, which sounds a little bizarre because I did write it myself. But when I listen to other audiobooks by other writers, I feel that I would like to have the book, so that if I wanted to turn back and reread a paragraph or something, I could. But my favorite reading time by far is in bed at night. When the day is all done and I've done my work, I like to read in bed, and I really look forward to that very much.
Thank you.
Before I ask my question, I almost want to ask a follow-up on Michael's question. And it's this: I've spoken to a number of writers who prefer certain people to serve as the readers for their audiobooks. Do you have that, or do you leave that up to the publisher? And then I'll ask my real question.
I'm so embarrassed to say that I don't even know the names of these readers. I just think that they're very professional. It's a whole trade. It's a whole art. And I wouldn't really interfere. Like, I couldn't really judge. I leave that to my publisher to choose the best people.
And the question I would have is that you had a wonderful spread in the New Yorker, which I shared with everybody on the call before we got this going. So, I mean, it had to be an exciting moment for you, because it really took your entire career into full circle. Walk me through how you felt about it, and walk me through, through your general feelings about being in the New Yorker, which is a great place to be. I mean,
do you want an honest answer, or do you want an interview answer?
Honest answer.
There's a whole genre of interviews where people give answers that are plausible for interviews, but they're not actually true. When I often don't read reviews of my novels. If somebody says this is a good review, I think to myself, I'll take your word for it. I might look at it, or I might not look at it, but John Updike once said that when people say that you have a good review coming out, like in the New York Times, he doesn't want to read it because it's like biting into a sandwich, which are just a couple little pieces of broken glass, usually. And that's often the experience of reading a review that people present as a good review. But I think I read all of the review, and I was very surprised at it. But to continue in my vein of honesty, because this novel is about mortality, it's about losing your husband when you're no longer young and usually not likely to find another wonderful husband. With the idea of the cosmos there, it's very hard to take emotions seriously. And it's very hard to feel that anything that comes from the external world is going to make a big difference in your spiritual condition. If you are all alone, if you've lost your spouse, and you get a great review, the main feeling you have is you feel sorrow that you can't share it with your spouse who's lost. So when people win awards or they have great honors, but they're all alone, it's sort of bittersweet, because I'm sure it's nice to win awards, but it doesn't mean a great deal if you don't have anyone to share it with. So that's sort of the position that I'm in, which is my honest answer.
Wow. Sarah, you're up.
Hi, I just have a quick question, which is, what led you to study at Rice?
Oh, that was expedient. My husband had a job. He was teaching as a very young, he just got his PhD. So his first job, which only lasted 1 year, we were only in Texas 1 year, he was teaching nearby And so I applied to the Rice University PhD program in English, but only because of the geographical proximity. And I lost interest in getting a PhD. I can tell you exactly why if you're interested.
I am interested.
I would take the bus to Houston, I think. Is that what it was? Houston.
Yeah, it was in Houston.
Yeah. And one time when I was taking the bus once a week, I got a new copy of the Best American Short Stories. And one of my stories was either in that volume or had been listed as an honorable mention. And so I thought to myself, I think I'll just be a writer. I remember that. I had the book on my lap and I thought, I don't want a PhD. I'm going to be a writer. I just made up my mind like that. So that was the end of the graduate school.
I'll jump in because we'll wait for a few more people to throw in some questions. Oftentimes, authors will have a love-hate relationship when movies are made about their books. Oftentimes, I've heard that people will love them, they'll hate them, or they almost distance themselves from a theatrical version of their work. Where do you fall on that plane?
Well, I would consider a movie a completely different work of art. It's much more selective, and of course the actors have been cast by a director. They're not necessarily going to be the people that we created. There's a novel of mine called Blonde that's been adapted for the screen by Andrew Dominic, an excellent, somewhat experimental director for Netflix. So I'm supposed to see that later this week, maybe tomorrow I'm supposed to see that. It's coming out early next year. And I'm not going to be judgmental, I'm sure. I'd be curious to know what the director has selected from the novel, because a novel is so dense and complex. You have to really just find a storyline and kind of just one little storyline and carry with it. So I think the very best screenplays usually are maybe novels that are not psychologically dense but have a lot of action, or they have a clear plot, or the best screenplays may be original screenplays. But it's hard to adapt a literary novel because the voice is the main thing about the writing. So when we're reading Thomas Hardy or Charles Dickens, you're really reading for the language, the wonderful language, particularly Dickens' great energetic language. But when a movie's made of a Dickens novel, it's something really very different, quite different. There's a lot that's left out.
Wow. Lou Frillman, you're up.
Joyce, thanks very much for being with us today. Our youngest daughter is a published author, and we were in a dinner a week or two ago, and somebody asked her how she kind of develops, she writes fiction, how she develops the storyline. And she said, well, the characters talk to me and the characters drive me. I don't drive them. My question is, do you feel like that either sometimes, occasionally, or, I know that you know what I mean, and
Well, some
how does that fit?
Some people feel that way about their writing. They're listening to parts of their own psyche.
Right.
It's like a dream where every figure in your dream is your creation. It comes out of your own. They seem like they're different people in your dream, but actually they're all some manifestation of yourself. So that could make sense. Or you could feel like Nabokov and Richard Ford and other writers who feel that their characters are puppets. The characters do what they tell them.
Yeah.
I feel great identification with my characters. And once they start talking, their voices are a little different from one another. I feel that they are going to say things I wouldn't necessarily expect them to say, but that's a weird thing to say because I wrote it. I don't want to sound mystical or paradoxical. Obviously, I'm writing it. But the idea in art, I think, is to tap some level of the unconscious, so that it's often said that poets should not know the end of their poems. They should be surprised when they get there. The final line or the final image in a poem should be a bit of a surprise to the poet. Otherwise, if you know where you're going, why would you even go there? So there's that element, like we don't know the ends of our dreams. We're very wrapped up and very riveted, in some cases emotionally, intensely riveted by our dreams because we don't know the ending.
Thank you.
We'll go to Daniel, then Janice. So Daniel, you're up.
All right, thank you, Joyce, for being here. It's an honor. I would love to know if you have or have ever had any techniques for stoking your own creativity as a writer, and if that and how that has evolved over time.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. You know, the different ways of writing. Some people do a lot of research. If you want to write a historical novel, the research is very enthralling, you know. And some people write about their own personal experiences. Some people disguise those experiences and some people don't. So I think there have been writers like Hemingway who deliberately set out to leave America. He didn't want to stay in the United States. He turned his back on his upper middle class family and background, his class, and he just moved away. He went to Europe. He was an expatriate. He did many things that were adventurous and dangerous. And he was even a war correspondent. He had many accidents in airplanes and so forth. Part of that was he was driven to experience things to write about that he felt he could never have done back home. That might be an extreme. He actually burnt out, and he died much younger than he might have. When Hemingway committed suicide, he had the body of a man 20, 30 years older than he was. He was about 62. So that's one extreme of a person who stokes his creativity, as you were saying, by actual existential experience. But another is someone like Emily Dickinson, who really didn't do anything that was repertorial. She had her life in the house, her father's house, as she called it. She just had a very sharp eye and a very exquisite sensibility. So things in the backyard, like a snake or a bird or a flower or the sunlight or the sky, you know, she was transmogrifying the real world into language. So she didn't have to travel anywhere at all. She just stayed in her father's house. But her creativity was stoked by looking very attentively at what's in front of you. Hemingway never did anything quite like that. His descriptions are somewhat broad. He will use a word like beautiful, which is it's a bland, generic word. Whereas with Emily Dickinson, I would guess, I am just guessing, she never uses any generic words like that. She looks sharply at one particular idiosyncratic thing right in front of her, and she'll describe it and describe emotions exuding from it. But I don't think she had that same air of the generic.
Thank you.
Janice, you're up. You're on mute, dear. Janice, you're up. You're on mute. I'll try to mute you here. Okay. Just ask her and there you go. There you go. You're ready to go.
My question was, of course, thank you for being with us. I feel enlightened after every one of these sessions, but I have a question about the current situation with all of it: COVID, isolation, the emergence in the middle of it of the Black Lives Matter, tearing down historic statues. It seems so turbulent to me every day. And I was wondering if it's fertilizer for books that are in progress, or future ideas?
Oh, I'm sure that many writers, poets, and artists will be writing about these turbulent months in the future, particularly young people, because their lives have really been dislocated. But anything that a writer's writing on right now would probably be something that had been started earlier. I mean, I am working on a novel that was started before, before the collapse of everything. We were all living our lives back in early March. I was teaching at Rutgers and at Princeton. And then suddenly we all went remote and we all became like hermits living in our quarantine isolation. So we entered a whole new dimension, and that was very abrupt. We did make the adaptation, though. I think most of us adapted pretty well. But the young people who had been in college, who had to go home, young people in the age group like 18 to 25 or so, they are really, I think, experiencing a radical dislocation of their lives. Once you get a little older, you might have your career, you have your job, you may be married, you have children, you have your house. You're settled, you're a little more settled. But in that other age group that I just mentioned, those young people were poised to explore the world, to meet many people, maybe to fall in love, to go to graduate school, to travel. They were poised to sort of create their best selves. But many of them now are confined and can't even go back to college. And I feel very, very sad for them. My students, obviously. So
I think that they were ill-equipped, and it's difficult to see. I have no children, but my sisters do, and to see their kids that are trying, and they are trying to explain to their children how to manage in this. And I think that must be the highest mountain for them, because we are of a different generation. So like you said, we're kind of settled. We have things, we have diversions, we have occupations, but they did not. They weren't, some of them in the development stage, but they've been halted. So now what happens a year from now? We can't expect them to just take off again on the same footing.
Well, it's a very good question, and you were asking me what I was writing about it, but I was really saying that the younger generation will be the generation of this pandemic, and they will be writing about it. It's like the lost generation that Hemingway seemed to represent, or people who wrote about the Depression or the Vietnam War. The certain generations that have a terrible tragedy or burden sort of on their shoulders, and they have to make their way through that to comprehend it. Those are the people who will be writing about it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's see. If more people have thrown your questions. I guess one question I would have would be this. What do you think, I mean, when you look at the future of fiction, and that's kind of one of those all-encompassing questions. For a while it seemed that the future of publishing seemed to be somewhat in peril with how fiction is being seen through ebooks or through audible books or something like that. But do you feel comfortable, or do you feel hopeful that in 50 years from now, as we all look back at this, those of us who are still walking on two legs, that American fiction will still be heading in the right direction?
Oh, it's hard to answer that, really. Whenever people talk about the future, nobody even understands what's happening like right now. I think people don't understand what happened in 2016. So to just try to make some predictions that are coherent and sensible about the future is really difficult. I mean, it's always been said, that the Broadway theater is failing, or the novel is dying, or fiction is dead, or nobody reads poetry. Those things are said all the time, and yet these phenomenon continue. You know, people are reading novels. I think because of the quarantine situation, maybe more people are reading books than ordinarily would be.
Jim Brosnahan, you're up. Mute. Jim, you're on mute. Jim, you're on mute. Hold on a second. We'll do the little ask to unmute. Okay, Jim, you're
Yeah, my question was, thank you. My question was whether you send drafts to other people, and if so, at what point?
No, I don't send drafts. No.
Did you ever?
No, I don't know why one would do that. No, I don't do that.
Okay,
I only feel comfortable sending out something that I felt was worthy of being read.
yeah. Thank you.
So I'll jump on that question that Jim asked a little bit too. When you go back to the 1970s, it was not uncommon for directors, you know, it was Spielberg or whomever, they would actually add scenes, or they would collaborate, often as not as a friend or as a ghost or whatever you want to say it, to certain movies. But I think are you saying that that's the difference between most writers and most, say, film directors, where what we're writing is predominantly a singular process, where directing or anything involved in the film industry may have a collaborative element to it?
Well, the director is a creator of the movie.
Right.
The novel or the screenplay is the material.
Right.
If you look at a movie that everybody's seen, like The Godfather 2, which was on television last night. I just happened to see it, I saw part of it. Now, what is so significant about that movie is the tone. The tone, the use of music, lots of darkness, shadows, very solemn. The movement of Al Pacino as Michael Corleone, he's very grave. He almost could be a priest. When Coppola made this movie, he was choosing many things that another director would not have chosen. Like Scorsese wouldn't have done that movie. Scorsese is much brighter and manic, and Scorsese has scenes that are almost like hysteria, very, very intense, throbbing music. If you think of a typical Scorsese film, or something like Wolf of Wall Street or Goodfellas. But when you look at The Godfather, that's solemn. That's really like a Catholic processional. And you wouldn't know that Michael Corleone, in a sense, he's just a criminal, but he's treated with such dignity, and his expression is very dignified. Everything about the movie is operatic, I guess that's the word. So the director may have been thinking of opera. So as I said, the director chooses the tone and the music of the movie, and he casts the movie. As soon as you're casting and choosing actors, you've sort of got the whole movie right there. Sometimes there are mistakes in casting that you can't get over, and sometimes there are very good decisions. But it's very different from writing a novel where there's just one person creating the whole. There's no casting. It's basically you're doing everything.
Well, thank you. Judy, you're up. Unmute.
I was typing the question just in case I, couldn't. It's interesting as we're talking about film language and how you notice the interpretations. Is there a book of yours that you could see yourself writing for the small screen or the large screen, developing into a new stream? I mean, you've conquered, I don't know if conquered is the right word, but you have such a large, you're so successful in many genres. Is there one of these that you see yourself bringing to the small screen now that everybody's stuck inside?
No, I haven't really thought much about that. That's a whole world, you know. It's like saying, should you take up being a kayak champion or something? I mean, there are lots of skills that are developed over the years that one just can't suddenly do. Like writing for television is a trade or a profession. It's not anything that a literary novelist would even know how to do. You have to be able to collaborate with a team. It's like a committee. It's, unless you're the director. I think Ricky Gervais writes his own material and then he directs it, and he acts in it too. But that's not anything a literary writer would probably ever even think of doing.
Anything that you think would make a good that you see, gee, how come they haven't made this into a movie?
No, I wouldn't have a thought like that. Why would I have a thought like that? I don't consider movies necessarily
I
that.
don't know if you had a favorite.
I mean, movies are a neutral medium. They're not necessarily better than any other medium. Most movies are not very good. I mean, most movies don't even get distributed. They're made and then they go to television or something. I wouldn't consider. I mean, a number of my novels have been made into movies. I didn't mention Smooth Talk was the first one, and that got some awards. That's excellent. That was the debut of Laura Dern, who's gone on to become an excellent actress. Then there was a movie made of We Were the Mulvaneys for television. That was quite good. Blythe Danner, Jeff Bridges was in that. That was very good also. Then there was a really terrible movie made of a novella of mine. I shouldn't talk about it. I didn't really see it. I just heard about it. It was the title of the novella is Rape, a Love Story, and it was adapted to the screen by somebody, and evidently it's not very good. They changed the title to Vengeance, a Love Story. But I never saw it. In fact, I don't even know why I'm talking about it. It's just that particular novella, Rape, a Love Story, one would think it would make a good movie because it's quite short and there are only about 2 or 3 or 4 characters, and it has a very clear plot line, and it's really about the victimization of women. I mean, a good movie might have been made of it, but it wasn't, you know. And as I said, most movies are probably not anything special.
I'll jump in as I wait for more people to ask a few questions. I want to kind of continue that vein a little bit because there's one person on this call who's been portrayed by another actor, then was portrayed by John Slattery. And I recall that once the production for the movie, which won an Academy Award of Best Picture, was in process, that John Slattery spent a lot of time with Ben. The other actors spent time with the other players or members of the Boston Globe. And I was wondering, and maybe it's a question that both you and Ben can kind of ask, and you had kind of talked about this a little earlier, where you had said, well, a director creates his own thing, but certainly if I was directing a film, you'd be the first person. If I was directing your work, you would be the first person I would call in order to make sure I would get it right thematically, as well as when I move it to the screen. So I guess the first question is there a sense of unreality when you watch something of yours on screen? And I would ask to Ben, is there a sense of unreality when you're portrayed by somebody else on screen? Joyce first.
Well, I've been talking a lot. I like that movie very much, but I'd like to hear the answer so Ben can answer.
Well, Bob, this is a diversion. Joyce should be talking here. I don't think we need to be talking about Spotlight, really.
No, that's a great movie.
It was surprisingly good. It sort of fell in our laps. These 2 young women producers who had very few credits just showed up at the Globe one day and said, we love that story, we want to do it. And we talked to them and gave them some real-time emails and things to base additional research on. And but as Joyce alluded, you have no control, essentially, when you turn it over. You build up a certain goodwill and relationship with the screenwriter and the director, and you hope for the best. And yeah, we were all shadowed by the actors who were all very collegial and collaborative, and seemed to be interested in what we did. I think that was just good luck. It turned out really well, but you really do have no control. You hope for the best.
Yeah, I think luck, probably luck is the ultimate, because you can be a great director like Martin Scorsese, and sometimes something goes wrong, even though you're a great director, it doesn't mean that the movie's going to turn out to be successful. It's like something very different, that writers are working with the medium of language. So, you're really not thinking about these other things. It's like, say you're a watercolorist and you're working with paints, you're not thinking about music. So if your art was being transformed into a symphony or something, it's hard to answer a question about that, because it's just, you're never really thinking about that. But I firmly believe it's a director's medium.
George Lewis, you're up.
Yeah, Judy and I had a question. You mentioned you like to read at bedtime, and we're just wondering who you're reading these days. Who are your favorite fiction authors? And I would add, how do you stay awake? It puts me to sleep.
And so I have to try to read to get sleepy. I would maybe just stay up so late. I don't always just read my favorite writers, but at the moment I'm rereading D.H. Lawrence's Women in Love. I belong to a little book club. There are only 4 people in it. I have taught this novel and read it probably about 4 times, but not recently. So I'm rereading Women in Love, which is a great novel. So strange. I think all great works of art are really unclassifiable and bizarre. There's so much strangeness in Lawrence. And before that, I was reading Tolstoy's War and Peace, which in some ways is a much more conventional novel. It's not nearly so interesting as Lawrence. I mean, Tolstoy's manner of presentation of his characters and his imagination and his ideas are much more conventional. Lawrence was extremely unconventional and unclassifiable. Perhaps one of my favorite writers, or maybe my favorite writer, is James Joyce. Ulysses, I think, is the single novel that I probably admire the most, Ulysses. And I reread that. I just read parts of that over again often.
Who's next? I have a few more questions.
I'm getting a little exhausted.
Well, what we can do is, we've been on now for about an hour and a half, about 90 minutes. Should we go with one more question and call it a day? And then we'll go. And what we'll do is I'll send you the book plates. We've got the books. They're coming here. And then what we'll do is we'll make sure that everybody gets their books out. So I will open the door to somebody who hasn't asked the question yet. Is there something you wish to ask? Priya, the journalist who is suspiciously quiet throughout, who has her own show and has not said a word.
Wrangling kids in the background. I'm curious because obviously as a writer, you interpret what you see, the events that are around you, and you help others see them through a certain lens. And I'm curious how you're seeing the events of today. And we've talked about how they're turbulent, but have they struck you in the same way as completely upending your life? Are you shocked? Are you surprised? Are you uncertain about what to do next in life? Or do you feel like there's anything familiar in what you're seeing.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean. You mean the police videos we've been seeing?
I think, as we were saying earlier, there's COVID, which everyone's been surprised about. The police videos, obviously, you've been attuned to police brutality for some time. Why don't I maybe ask one particular question instead of more of a general response to the time? Do you think that there's going to be sort of significant cultural change in America because of the BLM movement that's happening now? Do you see something different than before? Or do you think that this is a momentary uprising that'll change?
Well, I think it really just depends upon the election. If it's a fair and open election that represents the popular vote, probably there will be legislation that will favor citizens' rights over police immunity or whatever. There's a privilege that they have of immunity. If there's a more liberal or democratic wave, that will change the laws on the books in many states. And reproductive rights for women will be restored in many states. Now, if that doesn't happen, if there are 4 more years of the government we have, obviously things will stay just the way they are. They'll get more stringent. There'll be less money for education. Some budgets will be cut completely. Like it looks as if the post office postal service maybe become privatized. So it really depends. It's not so often that you can say that a single election will determine so much of the culture. But I think in this case, when you look at Congress, which is our lawmaking body, there are said to be, is it 300 or 400 bills in the Senate that have not been acted upon. Now, if any of those bills affected you in your life or your work or your loved ones or whatever, you would be very, very anxious for this legislation to be passed. It could be passed or it could not be. So that will depend. As far as the pandemic is concerned, evidently the so-called Spanish flu of 1918 didn't leave much of a mark. People didn't really write about it. They forgot about it soon. I was reading that only a few months after it subsided, there were huge outdoor events like sporting events and a big boxing match, and like 50,000 people were all gathered together. It's as if people have amnesia about trauma. So if and when the pandemic subsides, we probably will have a kind of amnesia about it. But the political residue, that will be very real.
Wow.
Thank you.
So I think this was we're becoming more and more comfortable with the Zoom platform. And I would like to thank Joyce for joining us. This was great. And it was, again, nobody had to find the restaurant. Nobody had to come all the way in from Princeton to New York City. We all did this from the comfort of our homes. I think we're going to see a lot more of this. So that's a lot of fun. So Joyce, I can't thank you enough for being part of this. And really was a special time. So we got a lot of fun stuff coming up, and just pay close attention to your email and have a great day. Be safe out there. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you,
Thank
Bob.
you, Joyce.
Bye.
Thank you very much,
everybody.
Joyce.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Felicia.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bob. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye
Thank you
now.
so much. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you.